Hello and welcome to our first collaborative session of Emergency Services Management here, and we're looking forward to a lot of good things coming up this term. This is our first collaborative session. This is one of three, and the other two will be subsequently following in the upcoming weeks. I will always post an announcement and let you know, and also have a video link for you, so this way you can get in, view the video, as well as being able to take a look at any questions that I may be posing there. And you also can email me any questions that you may have should you not have the opportunity to sit in on this collaborative session. So we are going to look at a few things today. We're going to be looking at some of the interagency collaborations that we have with emergency management, as well as some of the phases of emergency management. We'll touch on a few disasters that are out there, including flooding as an example. And then we'll also just wrap up in regards to some of the communications and some of the challenges that are being faced out there in the field pertaining to emergency management, as well as some of the operations that take place in the field. So let's get started and move on to our next slide here and take a look at interagency collaboration. So what is interagency collaboration? You're thinking that it's only internal. Well, it's not. Inter means that it's going to be external. And intra means internal. So intra means internally you're going to be working alongside one another in groups and your own teams. However, if you're going interagency, then you're going to be working outside the box. Then you're going to be working with other jurisdictions and local jurisdictions, and perhaps state and federal officials too, based on the scenario and the situation at hand. So interagency disaster management is going to be dependent upon the type of disaster and the level of the disaster and the severity of that disaster that is going to take place. If you have localized flooding, if you have any type of issue that you can handle as far as emergency manager in your jurisdiction, that is a good start, and that is something that can be taken care of with immediacy, not needing that many types of resources. On the other hand, now if something that is going to cross some of the city lines or some of the county lines, then you'll also need to take a look at the situation and see whether or not there's going to be a need for other jurisdictions to assist, such as flooding. Some of the disasters that we have here can be classified as natural or human-made disasters. Now, natural disasters are just going to vary depending upon the area within the United States and the vulnerabilities that are going to be taking place. Normally, along the coastal areas, you're going to have flooding, hurricanes, waterspouts, cyclones, etc. And if you're looking in the Midwest, for example, then you're going to be looking at mostly microbursts, tornadoes, and the ice storms, wind storms, snowstorms, etc. Now moving out to the west and southwest, well, you're take a look at fires of some significance. Also, you're looking at earthquakes and possible tsunamis that are going to be associated with those earthquakes. Again, my two favorite words I like to use: it depends. It just depends on the location and the vulnerability that you're going to have. So looking at one of the disasters, as I mentioned in the previous slide, let's take a look at flooding. So the most common type of disaster that we have here in the United States is going to be dealing with flooding. Flooding is going to be caused, obviously, here's the 1980s moment, yeah, by excessive rain. It's going to be something that's going to be with a tidal surge, or it's going to be with a tsunami, etc. But this is going to also result in erosion and overwhelming of the waterways. So I think we're all pretty much familiar with that, but this is just setting the foundation for our discussion here regarding flooding. So remember, interagency disaster management is going to be dependent upon the level of the disaster as well as the severity of the disaster. Disasters are going to be classified either as natural or human-made, and then of course then you're going to have one of the examples here dealing with flooding. You know that there's more than just one type of disaster, but for the purposes of this lecture, we're going to kind of focus on flooding on the next slide. Now, flooding, probably you may or may not know, contains water that is wet. Now, well, probably not, okay, but anyway, flooding contains a great dam collapse or flash floods and flooding after a fire. And heavy rains, ice jams, La Nina, levees collapsing, mud flows, new development, snow melt, spring thaw, tropical storms, hurricanes, a rainy winter season, and also coastal flooding, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. That's what we're looking at. Did I leave anything else out, class? I don't think so. I think what we have here is a comprehensive listing of what flooding is going to occur. But yeah, seriously, flooding is going to occur with any of these that you see on your screen here, but it's just going to depend on the situation. For example, right now in China, there's a dam that is very weak, it's very loose at the foundations, and it's already ready to collapse, and it's going to cause significant damage to a major population that's at the base of this dam as well as down the river. Now, in order to alleviate much of the pressure behind this dam, even though it's been condemned for decades now they're going to release some of that water, and unfortunately it's going to flood a lot of the communities that are going to be less impacted by these releases of this water, and the flooding is going to occur. And right now in China, that is exactly taking place. A lot of these areas, a lot of these people that have stores and market areas, and people that have lived alongside this river for quite some time are now being impacted. And there's a lot of videos out there showing that store owners have lost pretty much everything because of the release of this dam, in an effort to minimize some of the circumstances surrounding this dam and the amounts of people that are going to be impacted. So unfortunately, some people are going to be impacted more than others based on this governmental decision. Just food for thought, and another prime example of how flooding can make an impact upon a community as well as economically within that community. So again, floods are generally going to be with all of these things that you see here. I won't go through this listing once again, but you understand the precipice for flooding. Here in the United States, we're looking at heavy rains, torrential rains. We're dealing with coastal flooding, tidal surges, as well as a tsunami. Hurricanes are going to bring torrential rains regardless of the situation there, and it's going to continue to dump these rains probably for several hours, and probably can get in excess of a foot or two of rain depending on the type of tropical storm or the hurricane that is going to impact that particular coastal area. Furthermore, with flooding, another potential danger with flooding is the aging of these dams. There's 84,000 dams in the United States. 1/3 of these dams are approximately 50 years old or older. About 2,000 of these dams here in the United States are deemed unsafe. That's a lot of dams, and that's a lot of issues that can occur. Much as I just gave you an example on the China effort here in order to mitigate some of the circumstances surrounding the base of that dam, we have 2,000 dams here in the United States deemed unsafe. That's a lot of dams. And then being able to repair and also create a stronger infrastructure then is going to be a little bit caustic, because it's going to be monetary issues, plus being able to drain, plus being able to get to an Army Corps of Engineers or whomever is going to be assisting in repairing those dams, making an effort. And it's not an easy thing to repair these dams, especially if a lot of them are already weakened and falling apart. However, streams are going to be overwhelmed with the excess water, and these reservoirs are going to quickly fill. Much the same thing that's occurring in China right now. These same issues can occur here in the United States. We're not immune to those issues just because it's in a different part of the world. These dams are built for monitoring water and releasing certain aspects of water resources, and then not having the ability to maintain this is very difficult. But again, it goes back to infrastructure, and some of this critical infrastructure can fail. The problem is that if these things are not addressed in a timely manner, then a catastrophe can occur, and loss of life will occur in this. So again, these are many issues that are surrounding dams, the 84,000 dams that we have here, as well as the age, as well as the ones that are really impacted, are going to make an issue for the people that are living alongside that, or some of the streams and rivers that are associated with these dams that are releasing the water either expeditiously during a high rainy season, or if they're going to just maintain that water level. Again, we just have to be well aware that these dams are human-made, that they can crack, they can become weak, and that they can fail as well. Now you're probably asking yourself, well, what else can be done? What else can be done in order to mitigate the situation with flooding? And that's a very good question. Well, some of the questions that are often asked about flooding are including the following here that we have listed. Now, this is not a comprehensive listing of every question and flooding that is out there known to humankind. However, these are some of the main ones that we can take a look at. So, for example, how are human-made floods caused? How are the river basins going to be affected by changes and implemented by human-made actions? And then how does rapid urbanization make an impact upon the communities that are creating minimal runoff opportunities? Let's take a look at each one of these very, very quickly here. So how are human-made floods caused? I think I gave a pretty good example of that in dealing with the dams. That's one issue there. Also, some of the technology that's out there, an accidental release of water, as well as too much water within a reservoir can overflow and then cause other issues as well. Let's look at the second question here. How are the river basins affected by changes made by human-made actions? Well, if you change the direction of a river, if you change the flow of something, it's going to make a difference, and it's going to make an impact upon that community. If something was flowing in one direction and now it's flowing in another due to economic development or housing development, whatever it may be, there's going to be a significant impact upon those areas if there happens to be a torrential rainstorm. It's not going to be the same thing. So it's not going to be following that pattern that it is accustomed to, and it's going to be overreaching and outreaching. Mitigating some of those areas too can come into play when you're dealing with berms and dikes, etc., that are going to be constructed in order to minimize some of the devastation that can occur from flooding or from flash flooding. But it's going to depend on local engineers as well as working alongside other state and officials that can help in minimizing some of the impact for residents, as well as causing evacuations when the river is rising, for example. And finally, how does urbanization make an impact on the communities and in creating this runoff opportunity? In 2007, I had an opportunity of working alongside Franciscan Alliance and working at one of the local hospitals over here. And many years ago, it used to be farmland that was surrounding this hospital. Now it's all concrete buildings and what they refer to as a concrete jungle because it's all concrete everywhere that you go. And there's no ability to have any runoff anywhere. So that being the case, the water has to go somewhere. Water seeks its own level. Water sought its way into our hospital and flooded out approximately 200,000 square feet of our lower level, knocking out all the power, knocking out all the elevators, causing us to evacuate 66 patients, etc. And these are some of the things that can happen because so many things are built up around where water used to be able to drain, where water used to be able to go and efficiently flow away. Now we have a situation here that's causing it to come up through the sewer system. Now, once the sewer system is there, most of the sewer systems are located in front of entrance and exit doors, at least in front of major facilities such as a hospital. And it comes up and it welcomes itself in. And that's what took place in our place. So you have to be well aware that, yes, urbanization and taking away some of these drainage areas and some of the land that's out there does cause an issue pertaining to flooding, because even though there may be a sufficient drain system or maybe a sufficient berm that has been built, it's still taking away from the original place and the local areas that once had the ability to absorb that water. Now there's going to be standing water. Now there's no place for this water to go, and sometimes it's going to impact communities and community businesses in such a manner that's, well, not so good as we can see from this example. So again, a lot of these questions are just basic questions here that I touched upon. There's some of the foundations that we have for flooding. Again, not a comprehensive listing here. So let's take a look at the next slide. So you go from flooding to a flood of leadership. Yes, there's a lot of leadership out there, and you need leadership. You need to flood those areas with leadership. Well, okay, maybe not. But leadership is a comprehensive area that's going to be diverse, it's going to be complex, it's going to be increasing with the occurrence of natural and human-made disasters, and the strategies for collaboration is going to be a top priority when you're out there. It's going to be dealing with local, it's going to be dealing with state and emergency officials and effective emergency management. Also, community leadership is going to be comprised of the elected officials that are there, county emergency management people, staff and law enforcement, fire departments, public works, as well as non-governmental agencies or NGOs known as the Red Cross, Salvation Army, and then church organizations. These all come into play and they're very helpful. Let's take a look at the first one here, the first bullet point. So if you're looking at having a disaster, well, not hopefully having a disaster, but you get my point. If you're eventually there may be a disaster within your community, you're going to need leadership and leadership strategies. One of these ways is to sit down with your team and being able to discuss what may occur, what resources are going to be needed, and who are the parties that are going to be involved. On the other hand, it's going to be probably to your benefit to have a tabletop exercise and being able to discuss some of those situations that are going to occur, or perhaps some of the resources that are going to be needed from local jurisdictions. And this is where it kind of leads into the second bullet point here, where you're going to need elected officials sitting at the table. The same thing dealing with your NGOs, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army people, and the church organizations. These people have a wealth of resources and a wealth of knowledge that can help you in maintaining some sense of normalcy during a disaster, as well as during the recovery phase. So keep that in mind as you're going along, that community leadership is not just going to be comprised of what we have mentioned here with the local emergency managers and fire departments and alphabet police that are going to be mentioned, but also some of the diverse areas of your strategic placement, your local, state, and federal emergency managers that are going to participate in this. And it does take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of communication in order to meet some of those guidelines and some of those standards that we're so accustomed to having in place, but maintaining that. Let's face it, leadership changes pretty much in the field. An executive that's out there is going to be in that position 5 to 7 years. After that, there's going to be a changeover, or there may be people moving on to bigger and better things. But so you're going to have to maintain and update your plan every now and then. You're going to have to look at some of the phone numbers and the people and emails and such that have changed over the past perhaps 6 months. You never know. But one thing that is constant out there in the field is change, and that's what's going to happen with leadership. It's going to change. It's going to be dynamic, and you're going to have to be flexible when dealing with some of these situations. So in looking at that, you do have a combination of things dealing with elected officials, dealing with your community stakeholders, as well as some of your state and your federal resources that will be needed in a situation such as we talked about, for example, dealing with flooding. And when you're dealing with these situations, you're going to go through emergency management phases. And I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with some of the emergency management phases that are here, but this is just kind of a brief refresher, if you will, in getting us involved not only in week 1, but also in the subsequent weeks 2 and 3 materials that we'll be looking at. So mitigation phase, that focuses on minimizing the impact or the effects of the known hazard, or eliminating the risk altogether. Now, trying to eliminate the risk altogether is very difficult because no policy is perfect. No ability to put up a dike or a berm or construct a wall or something will be able to mitigate all of the circumstances out there. It can minimize a lot of the effects and impacts that are going to be out there in the community. That's true. But here you need to understand that eliminating the risk altogether is going to be a definite challenge. Next, in the preparedness phase, then local and state response agencies are going to be there, the private sector, the non-governmental organizations that we just talked about. They're going to develop an emergency management plan. One of the ways that they can do this is to form a coalition of emergency response based on their community, based on the resources, based on the local jurisdictions that are going to be out there. These non-governmental agencies can play an integral role in assisting during disasters and emergency situations beyond belief. Church organizations are great resources because they have mass humanity. They have a lot of people in these congregations, and they come out in droves. Every time you turn around, you thought you saw the end of this line of people, and there's more, and there's more, and they care, and they're good at what they do, whether it's going to be assisting with sandbagging efforts during flooding, or whether it's going to be in the recovery phase in trying to be a carpenter or a plumber or a painter, whatever. A lot of people have a lot of talent and a lot of good talent out there that can help during these phases. So in the preparedness phase, it might be the job of the emergency manager or the coalition to figure out who has all these talents, what can be done in being able to prepare finally for the recovery phase once it's taken place, who's going to be the best go-to person in order to get all these people lined up. And then finally here, during the response phase, your primary and secondary agencies are going to be prepared to activate the emergency operations and response plans. These things are going to be already out there. They're going to be developed, I hope. If you've done your homework and you've done the right thing, they should be there. But being able to make a good concerted effort right up front, activate the primary and secondary agencies, get all the people and the resources and the references that you need together, and then activate those emergency operations plans expeditiously rather than waiting for a long time. There's nothing better than being able to pick up the phone, make 3 phone calls, and have 66 units that are responding to your your disaster or your initial response. You could always send them back. It's great to have all these resources and people that are might be standing around for a little while, and then let them go or put them into action depending on the situation at hand. So in looking at this, just to recapitulate this area, the mitigation phase, it focuses on the minimizing of the effects or the hazards that are going to be within that community or eliminating that risk altogether. Secondly, you're going to be dealing with the preparedness phase, and that preparedness phase is dealing with your local and state responses, as well as the private sector. You have your NGOs, which are your Salvation Army and Red Cross, that are going to be responding, and also you have those church organizations as well. And finally, during the response phase here, your primary and secondary resources are going to be out there, and then being prepared to activate those emergency operations plans will be critical in these incidents right up front. And finally, in the final recovery phase, your interagency collaboration that's going to take place between your local, state, and federal governments are going to provide assistance to disaster victims throughout the federal assistance programs and the Small Business Administration, your SBAs, as you can see here. And then assist the home and business owners with low interest loans. That is the hope, and that's how it's supposed to work. Unfortunately, there are always snags and things that are going to occur out there in the field. However, based on some of the situations that FEMA has been through, based on updating the systems, our technology, and being able to go through this process with frequency all over the country, and then coming to those areas that have been impacted by a disaster, this makes it a lot smoother. So in the recovery phase, that interagency collaboration, it might go all the way up to the federal level, but also local, state, and federal governments are going to have to work alongside one another in order to communicate, collaborate, and then get through this recovery phase as expeditiously as possible. The Small Business Administration is going to be a key element here in trying to help out and trying to assist these homeowners and these businesses in dealing with low interest loans in an effort to reconstruct, pave, remove debris, remove trees, etc. But these are some of the things that can be done, and some of the things that are being offered in an effort to recover and get back to some type of normalcy in a lesser amount of time rather than extending that period of time. So not only do you have to plan for these things, but you also have to plan for evacuating in the areas that may be impacted. Okay, so again, we're dealing with our example here of flooding. So for example, after the emergency planning team has selected and found out the potential hazards for that particular area, then identification needs to be assessed of those types of things that are going to make an impact there. And then the next step is to gather that demographic information on the population within the area with these known hazards. So it's going to take a little bit of time. It might take several months. It might take up to a year. A good evacuation plan probably is going to take up to a year to figure out where all these evacuation routes are going to be, what's going to be closed, what directions are going to be moved, what are the street names, what are the locations, where are the meeting places, etc. That is going to take a lot. You also have to understand that there are going to be some of the populations there that are going to be elderly. You're going to have pediatrics that are going to be involved, those that don't speak English, that only have English as a second language, etc., etc. So evacuation planning is not just drawing a line saying, you go here and turn left. There's a lot that is going to be involved, especially seeing how this one route is going to be used. Now, if that route isn't going to be available, now what? So you're going to have an alternative route to get through. So it does take a lot of time and a lot of coordination and working alongside engineers as well as those officials that are within that particular area. And then some hazards are going to be limited to a specific area, while others can affect an entire city, a county, or a township. This is where that interjurisdictional collaboration is going to come into play. This is where interagency developmental plans are going to make an impact on some of these areas here. So you're basically going to be looking at city, county, and local townships that may be impacted, and the whole state may be impacted for that matter. How many times have we seen a lot of these hurricanes that come through, for example, in Florida, that start at the tip of Florida and then work its way all the way up through the mid part of the state, all the way up until it gets into Georgia, etc. There's a lot of areas that are going to be impacted by an event such as that. So emergency planning teams need to be prepared, obviously, and they also need to select some of those potential hazards that are going to be within that immediate community, and then plan for the next community over to theirs. And it does help because this way we can see who needs to be moved expeditiously, and we can also see the ones that are going to be able to drive and perhaps get out of harm's way days in advance. With the technology that's out there now, for example, with hurricanes and some of these storms that do approach the United States, we have the opportunity to warn residents. We do have the opportunity to get people out and move them to safer locations, even if it means moving into other states nearby. That can take place. So again, some of these hazards are going to be limited to that local jurisdiction, an entire city, for example, or it might be in a township. But then keep in mind that some of these disasters do not stop at those county or township lines, and they make an impact upon the entire state. And in looking at the entire state, or even some of those local areas that we just described, effective evacuation planning is going to be critical for life-saving efforts. And first, the emergency plan should identify numerous shelters within the demographic area where friends and families can evacuate to. There has to be a designated location. Many times these emergency managers and emergency planners are going to have this evacuation plan out there, and it's going to have a designated route, and it will say evacuation route, and it'll have a picture of a cyclone or a hurricane or tornado or whatever it may be on these signs, but it's going to be a designated route. And then they're going to have a designated area that's going to be located perhaps out of the harm's way, several miles away, or perhaps it's going to be several counties away, depending on the direction of that particular storm. Again, these shelters are going to be pre-stocked with water, food, cots, blankets, etc. Restrooms are going to be available with sufficient supplies, and that's what we need to consider too when we're doing an alternative care site. And that's pretty much what these shelters are, alternative care sites. The need for alternative care sites are imperative for successful operations for the command post, but also for the people that are being removed from their homes and need to go to an alternative care site to stay out of harm's way. Hopefully this is only going to be a temporary thing, and it's only going to be for a minimal amount of time, such as 2 to 3 days. But unfortunately, there are times where a lot of these alternative care sites are going to be full, and they might be up to a week or perhaps longer. That's when FEMA is going to come in and perhaps perform temporary housing and temporary mobile units that can be used if there happens to be a major disaster in those areas. So again, emergency planning need to identify the numerous locations, numerous shelters, numerous evacuation routes and areas where friends and families can meet, and then these shelters should be pre-stocked with some of the things that we mentioned here, with the water, the food, cots, and blankets at a minimum, in order to accommodate those people who did have to evacuate their community. Secondly, transportation for evacuees to these shelters is definitely going to be necessary. The city and school buses are excellent modes of being able to transporting citizens that don't have the opportunity to have vehicles. or if it happens to be in a condensed area where vehicles are very difficult to find parking. So again, transportation to an evacuation shelter is going to be critical in doing so. Keep in mind that a lot of these areas, such as rest homes, etc., are going to need a little bit more help, and that's where these city buses and school buses are going to come into play, because they're able to have wheelchair lifts, for example, or they might be able to get more people inside these buses and evacuate them to a location and then come back for the rest in order to evacuate them in a good amount of time. And then bus routes and then pickup locations definitely have to be pre-identified in the evacuation plan. You can't just say that, okay, well, we're going to go here and then we're going to pick them up over at the Target parking lot in such a location. You need to have that designated already. And more importantly, you need to ask to make sure that designated location can be used, because sometimes they will not allow you to use those because they have their own situation that they may be monitoring, or they may not feel open to certain situations. I know that in coastal areas that churches have been very responsive in opening their doors to people and using their areas that normally are places of worship, but leaving people in there until the worst of the disaster has gone by. But on the other hand, I've heard quite the opposite, where some people are just not apt to opening their doors. They're not willing to allow people to come inside and just reside there until the storm is over, and it makes it very difficult for the emergency planners as well as the emergency operations center as a whole to get people to and from. So again, transportation is going to be a key to and from these locations, as well as trying to find up a pre-identified location that is going to assist in the evacuation planning process. Next and third, many residents will not be able to evacuate because they do not have a disposable income for gas, hotel, or food. So in many instances, the underprivileged and underserved may be impacted severely by these disasters, and we do see this many times. Likewise, the residents may fear looters may come into their homes once they do evacuate, and they're afraid of losing things that they have, the basic necessities. And then other residents are reluctant to leave a disaster area for fear of losing their job. So it's very, very difficult, and it's a very tedious process. But once we put things in perspective, hopefully the majority of the people that are going to be involved in evacuation and evacuation planning are going to be able to identify the circumstance. Life safety. Life safety comes first. We can replenish some of the things that have been lost as far as food is concerned. We do fear the looters, but we also have to fear the fact that we might not be able to come out of this situation because of how strenuous it may be. If it's a Category 5 hurricane that's hitting the coastal area, that's a good signal to move prior to its arrival. Other residents are going to be reluctant to move too, due to the fact that they have family members there that are saying, I'm not going, I'm just going to stay here, and we're just going to wait this out and take our chances. So there's a lot of issues that are occurring, and a lot of times there may be a mandatory evacuation that is going to occur depending on the type of storm and the severity of the storm. And other times they're saying that they might come through the neighborhood twice and just give you an adequate warning saying that you need to evacuate and leave. If not, you will be on your own and responsible for your own life until the situation merits itself, where it's going to be a little bit safer to come into the location. It's just going to depend. It'll depend on everything that's going to be associating with that storm, as well as how many residents are going to be within that designated area. Fourth, the residents may choose not to evacuate for health reasons, and that's a big one, due to the fact that some of these people may be bedridden, they may be in wheelchairs, and also they may be in the situation where, let's just face it, that they're old and they can't get around as well, and they don't want to leave their homes, they don't want to leave their dogs and cats behind, and there may not be room in boats and things for extra bags that they want to take and such. These are some of the situations that are going to occur out there and have been occurring, and rightfully so, because these are people's belongings, it's people's lives, and some of the homes that they've probably been in for 40 years or perhaps longer. and it's very, very crucial to them to maintain their ability to remain independent. So again, we have to keep in mind some of the health considerations there. And many of the residents can be under a doctor's care, take medications, etc. And then the medications that are there may not be able to be safely driven to a certain location. The pharmacies may be running dry from certain medications and things, and it require further transportation from getting point A to point B. So a lot of people that are depending on medication may not want to leave, and it's a simple little thing. However, people are going to be concerned about their health and well-being. One, mentally leaving their place and their belongings behind, which is psychologically traumatizing in itself, but also whether or not they're going to have enough medication. If their medication runs out, how are they going to get it, especially if they're going to be away for a duration of time? So these are all things we have to consider as far as emergency managers are concerned, as well as the life safety and well-being of our people that are in our jurisdictions. And fifth, the social networks are very important in being able to consider the evacuation. The social networks are going to be your extended families, your immediate families, your church organizations, your organizational affiliations, etc. Also, we can look at some of the technological advances, such as Facebook, such as Twitter, etc., and being able to get the message out. YouTube is another way saying, hey, this is what's going on in my neighborhood. This is where we're going to be located. Can someone please help? It gets the message out there. Is it a little bit risky? Yes, but in acts of desperation and times of need, in order to get out of harm's way, it might be one of those social networking and social media networks that you can use in order to promote health safety. So frequently, the family car is unable to transport the immediate and extended family because a large number of family members may be associated there. Consequently, the family is going to choose to shelter in place, or to obtain a shelter or transportation to a shelter nearby. Again, depending on how large the family is, depending on what the economic situation, and depending on whether or not the family agrees to leave or not, those are all going to be considerations for the emergency managers to take into consideration when they're wanting to evacuate a community. Again, if there's a law that's going to be laid out that's going to say, yes, you're going to be leaving at this time, you are in danger, and this is something that the county or the district or whatever is going to mandate, then regardless of what, they're going to have to leave. And they always say you can't force people to go, but if there's a very, very dangerous situation, I'm sure that they will be more than happy to accommodate and bring extra provisions or whatever is needed to remove those people from harm's way, especially like the example I gave in a Category 5 hurricane. So again, the fifth area here is going to be dealing with your social networking considerations, as well as your social networks dealing with your families, your extended families, and your social media outlets. And then being able to take your family, and hopefully everyone is in agreement in leaving that area, unfortunately due to the circumstance at hand. So again, there's a lot of things to consider for emergency planners as well as a family member in trying to leave harm's way. And with that wraps up our collaborative session number 1. I'm very grateful that you had an opportunity to view this and also to attend. If you have any questions in regards to the class or any of the material that we just covered here, please feel free to contact me. You all have my email. You also have my cell phone number, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Again, this is going to occur 2 more times, not the same material. We're going to move into weeks 4, 5, and 6 for Collaborate Session 2. And Collaborate Session 3 will be dealing with weeks 7 and 8. And that'll again have a little bit of different material. And then the last session, Collaborate Session number 3, that one will have kind of like a summation and culmination of everything that we covered from weeks 1 all the way up until week 8. We'll just be abbreviated, but I just want to make sure that you have a good grasp, a good knowledge of the information that we covered, and answer any questions that may be lingering out there. Again, please be sure to work through your assignments. Remember to utilize the discussion boards if we have discussion boards for that particular week, and then also remember to email me with any questions that you may have. Again, thank you for your time this evening, afternoon, morning, whenever you have the opportunity to to look at this, and also being able to move forward in your academic endeavors. Thanks once again, and you all know where to find me should you have any questions.